Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked,
and sometimes what didn't,
you will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
and inspire you to do even greater things.
Before we jump into today's conversation, a special thanks to PM Power Consulting for encouraging and supporting this show right from the start. With over 1,000 person years of collective experience, PM Power has helped many organizations, teams, and individuals chart out their own journeys of excellence and make progress. Thank you, PM Power. Now, let's move to today's episode. Hi, Eric. Welcome to the Software People Stories.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Like we always do, we'll start with a self-introduction. You can talk about your origin story, how you got associated with tech, and then your career trajectory, what you've been doing, and then we'll take it from there.
That sounds great. Let's see my story. So I've been doing this a while, as you might notice by the gray hair. I, like a lot of folks in my generation, I started getting into computers kind of peripherally through my dad. My dad was doing a little bit of computer work back in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And by the time my teen years rolled around, he had built a home computer that my mom was using to write her dissertation. So of course I started playing around a little bit with it, writing some basic. The really simple, 10 go to 10 kind of thing where you get those lines across the screen. That was always fun. Hung out in computer stores. And then when I got to college, finished high school, got to college, I decided to actually study architecture and photography instead of computers. I, like a lot of folks my age, did not get a degree. I started working and naturally started to fall into technology. By the early 90s, I was, the internet was kind of showing up. There were these interesting things going on at the Exploratorium. I was living in San Francisco, still am living in San Francisco. The Exploratorium is this giant science museum. And they're doing this really cool displays with this neat new thing called the World Wide Web. And concurrent to that, as I was kind of diving into that, I was working at Wells Fargo as a programmer now at this point. So I was working on some internal systems. So it just sort of, there's this natural flow and where I just ended up doing computer stuff. And that photography and architecture background, studying architecture as an architect, the physical world, studying photography and that creativity, visualizing things really helped me in my technology space. So I was at Charles Schwab for a while, then I was at Wells Fargo first, and then I ended up at, as a contractor for a little bit, floated around, did some work in Netscape. And then I was at Charles Schwab. You can kind of see I'm working at these financial services companies. And at Charles Schwab, I started getting deeper into security. Also led an initiative to get Charles Schwab to adopt Linux as an approved operating system inside of the company. And then after that, when I was done with Schwab, I started working in the agency world. So I was at Razorfish. I was at a company called Mechanism. Shout out to them, great company. Very briefly at Edelman, it's a PR firm, but we were doing some kind of agency-related stuff there. And then about 12 years ago, I ended up at a company called Presence. So a small company, we grew. We're acquired by a company called Work & Co. about 3 years ago. I love working there. So based out of New York, and then Work & Co. was acquired about a year or so ago by Accenture. The cool thing is we're still independent. We're doing our thing. We are Work & Co. We're creative. We're kind of driving stuff forward. And, that's where I am today. I'm now, doing technology leadership. I'm responsible for a lot of the security stuff inside of Work & Co., which was a nice transition. When I was at Presence before we were bought by Work & Co., I was kind of the equivalent of the CTO as well as our CISO. And that's my story.
Oh, wonderful. Let me start with the crossover from making physical things like an architecture and making things that are not really visible many times, particularly security and stuff like that. How was that for you in terms of how you thought about problems or approach to solutions?
I think that there is a lot of planning that goes on in the physical space. Like I didn't get an architecture degree. I studied it for a while. But there's a lot of I remember a story that someone once told me early on, one of my architecture instructors, and he was talking about designs. He said, it's great that you go out there and as an architect and you come up with this amazing design and it looks absolutely beautiful. You've got this wonderful building. But when you're looking at the design, the details start to matter. And he said, that little architectural detail that you added to this building, how is the carpenter who's going to build that? How are they going to swing the hammer? Right? How are they going to use this? How are they going to actually implement that? So he really got me to start thinking about there's this idea of like the perfect or this beautiful architecture, but you now have to take that architecture and apply it into the physical world. How is it going to get implemented? How is it going to be maintained? How is it going to get built, right? And I think it's the same thing within software. We can sit down and I actually had this experience very briefly when I was at Charles Schwab, as I was transitioning from an individual contributor into a technology leader and an architect. I sat down, we had a system that we wanted to build. It was internal facing, and myself and another architect, we thought through all these problems. And we came up with a solution that was going to take for frickin' ever to implement, right? And it would have been great. The thing is the company didn't have forever, and the company didn't have a ton of money, and so we basically, because of the business needs, we kind of lowered our sights, and we came up with a solution that was implemented in basically 6 weeks, and it required manual intervention to update the system every quarter. Someone had to go in and kick something off and do a little bit of work to update the system. However, even though it wasn't the perfect architectural solution, it was still a roaring success because it saved the company, like in the first quarter it existed, it saved the company like a couple $1 million. So every quarter that ROI was there, $2 million a quarter. And that happened because we took the perfect architecture, we lowered our sights, and we did something that made sense, that was implementable. And even though it wasn't perfect, it was more than good enough.
Yeah, actually, that's very interesting because many times as a technical person, the tendency to over-engineer is always there.
Yeah.
So how do you stop yourself from making something that is, say, more valuable and deliver quickly?
So I think you need to know what you're building. And I don't think this applies to everyone, not just a leader, an architect, a CTO, but I think it also applies to individual developers. You need to know what you're building. And I think as technical leaders, it's important that we empower our technology team to ask those questions, to slow things down if needed. If I think a lot of folks will get into Agile and they'll have that Agile process and they're kind of checking a box like, hey, we've defined what we're building and now everyone has to go out and build it. But they can't define it. You can't have a sprint planning session if folks don't actually know what they're building. And they need to be empowered during the course of a sprint to be able to go to the rest of the team, to go to the business owner and say, the product manager, and say, hey, I still don't understand this. I'm building it out. I've run into something that doesn't make sense with what we've talked about. We need to slow down and figure out how to fix it. That's how you keep from over engineering, right? If you don't understand the business need, it's easy to kind of go off on the path of like, let's just build the absolute perfect solution because you don't know what you need.
Hmm.
And I also think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, no.
Oh, you.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were interrupting. I think the other thing is, it makes me think of technical debt.
Hmm.
So a lot of folks think that technical debt is a bad thing. I don't. I think that every company in the world runs off of debt, right?
Hmm.
You look at the company, they start off, the founder gets a credit card, they go into debt $25,000, 50,000, 100,000, whatever it is, to build that company. Now they don't go crazy. They don't take on a debt that's unsustainable that they can never pay off.
Hmm.
But they recognize that they have to take on a little bit of debt to get past that starting moment. And I think as technologists, we can't be afraid of doing that, right? So, kind of the big ultimate takeaway of this is like understand what we're building, right? Make sure we're building to the business needs, and then recognize when it's okay to take on a little technical debt. Maybe, we know that at some future date we need to refactor this, but today's not that day. Let's
Hmm.
get it out the door and then own the fact that we're going to correct it later.
Good. You brought it out nicely that the developers need to understand, the big picture and the business need. Uh, but then the other side is also about understanding the users and the situations in which they're going to be using it. Particularly when you're talking about security or anything else, you design with a certain set of assumptions. And when it is people who need to actually use those systems or beat those systems, how do you kind of model that, or how do you make sure that you have those, empathy on one side and guardrails on the other?
Well, I mean, I've been working in agencies with large strategy design teams for a long time, and so I think that's really important
Mhm.
to have a part of your team, if not the core, depending upon your application, that really is there advocating for the user, that is thinking about the user needs, and so you have that upfront UI UX work. You do that usability testing, kind of explore what the user is looking for, come up with prototypes. I think prototyping and presenting that to a small subset of potential users to get their feedback is important. Um, and then as you're going along, you have the QA, and then having your QA usability UI UX constantly revisiting, right? That constant, the value of iterations. And then I think having the development team also think of themselves as users, right? So when I'm looking at hiring developers, particularly folks who are focused on the front end, I like to look for folks who have an experience outside of technology world, right? So I think do you have a creative outlet? Have you done things beyond technology? I love what I do. And I love working with people who love what they do as well, but I want folks who also have kind of a well-rounded world view, right? Or have experiences beyond technology, right? So that when you're looking at what you're building out, you can think as a user, not just as a pure technologist. So I think all of that together, the UI team, the UX team, QA, usability testing, and developers who understand the world beyond the technology, I think helps you build a very user-centric application.
Yeah, that's wonderful. But in security, we also keep hearing things about social engineering,
Right.
how many of the hacks are based on that. So, as a developer or a designer uh, architecting solutions, how can we understand that, and how can we, build some protection?
I mean, that's tough. Social engineering, I think is a lot, it's really difficult, right? Because
Yes.
it's often like there's a phone call.
Mhm.
If you're looking, someone calls into a customer service and they sound really convincing and you give away a password, right?
Mhm.
Um, so that's hard to manage against, right? But if we start at the application level before we get to the other places, I think you need to be baking in security from day one,
Mhm.
right? So I think as a technology leader, you need to be constantly reminding your team, excuse me, about about security issues, concerns, um, about what's happening in the real world. You want to get people looking at things like the OWASP top 10, since 25, so that they're familiar with the most common security vulnerabilities in the applications or in whatever they're building out, so they account for that, right? I think you need to have, really solid tooling, so some static analysis, some dynamic analysis. I think you need to have constant checks from the security standpoint. And then I think you need, as a developer or as a technology leader or as a security leader, you need to be willing to have the hard conversations with the product team. And the reason I say that is security is a trade-off. It's always a trade-off. You are adding friction into the user experience.
Right.
And it is natural to say, hey, look, users don't want to have to log in on a daily basis, right? And you as a technology or security leader need to have the conversation with your team. You need to, with the product team, you need to help them understand what the potential threats are. And help them understand what the risks are, right? So if you're building a simple marketing application where you're just collecting email addresses, you want to protect those email addresses, but the user experience when you're collecting those email addresses, if it gets compromised, it can be embarrassing. As long as the data is not lost, it is what it is, right? So maybe you have a slightly lower or a higher tolerance for risk in that case, right? If you're building a banking application, you can't have any tolerance for risk. And so you need to figure out, basically, what is the hill you're going to die on, right? We're not going to tell a person, as an example, if they enter in a username, password combination, and there's a failure, we're not going to return an error message that says, hey, give us the proper password for this username. You've revealed a ton of information to a hostile actor, right? So you need to help your product team understand that they have to make that trade-off. And I think for individual developers, that can be very hard to do, right? They're lower down the totem pole. It's high risk for them if they're pushing back. And that's where, as security and technology leaders, you need to stand up for your team and have that pushback. And when you identify something that is a hill to die on, you need to go there. You need to go all the way there to the point of like, hey, you know what? I'm writing this down. You guys want to go in a different direction, product team? You guys have to assume the risk. I want that in writing. And we're going to share that with everyone. Like, we're going to share it with the right people. Like, you have to own this, right? And if you're not willing to do that, if you're not willing to fight for what you think is right and for your team, maybe you shouldn't be a leader in this space.
Yeah, before we jump into the leadership, that actually I have a bunch of questions related to that. Just staying on the same topic of the developers' understanding.
Yeah.
What have been some of your practices that have helped in communicating and getting a confirmation that they have understood?
So I think you start off with like really good designs, UI, UX, and then a really nice set of at least high level requirements. Like, what are we trying to accomplish here? Right. So you have that clear understanding. And then I think you need to sit down with the whole team, everyone, not just the developers, but everyone needs to kind of walk through all that. So that's something that's led by your UI, UX team. And I want active participants in that conversation from the development team. I want folks asking questions, kind of pushing back on designs, really kind of helping flesh stuff out. All the teams I've worked with, all the designers, all the UI people, all the UX people, they love that, right? Because those challenges help them think through the problem and make sure they're really delivering something solid. So that first exposure to the experience is absolutely critical, right? So you have the development team there understanding that. I think the next thing is every sprint. You have that sprint review, that sprint planning session, and potentially a grooming session is also critical to the understanding of the application, right? What are we building, right? So it's one thing to look at the whole thing holistically, but now we're getting down to brass tacks and we're building individual features, we're building the functions. And so the team, again, has that opportunity. Let's get in there, let's dive in, let's take these pieces apart have those conversations, and work through it together. I think then everyone's implementing code, right? And when you're done with your code and you ask for a pull request, excuse me, I'm looking for the person reviewing that PR to actually download the code, run it, make sure it runs on their local, make sure it makes sense within the bounds of the requirements or the ticket that was associated with that PR, right? Or the ticket if there's multiple tickets. You should be able to run it. It makes sense. The boxes are checked. So you're constantly having this kind of cycle of introducing the problem space, the requirement. There's a conversation around the requirement. Even when we're implementing it and we're reviewing it, there's a conversation around the implementation. And then that code is pushed into a testing space. The testing team is going through validating it. And by having all those conversations, you're constantly helping the team grow and understand what are we building, right? And the reality of what we plan to build, right? When we were through in the planning session and what we delivered, there's going to be differences. It's going to change over time. And having that constant iteration, review, build, helps the team understand what we're building, what we're doing. It becomes a part of, it's in their bones at that point. And then if you have to bring other folks onto the team, everyone else can help the new person on the team understand what we're building. Right. So I love documentation, but at the end of the day, the best documentation is, your team, what they built, what they understand, and how they can share it with the other folks that come on board.
Yeah, this is when you're talking about the team. But then you have also been working in different industries. You said banking, tech, and then security, and now in the advertising and media space, right? How do you develop an empathy understand the industry and also develop an empathy for your clients?
I think you have to be humble, actually. So, I'm never going to be an expert in an industry, in the industry of my client. Right. My client has been in their industry for 10, 15, 20 years. They know it inside and out. And so I think you have to start with humbleness of I'm very good at what I do, but I don't know what you do. I'm not going to presume to know what you do. And so that humbleness is helpful. And then the second thing is curiosity. When I was transitioning into more of a senior role, I remember, there's this kind of moment where you're a junior developer and you're asking a ton of questions. And then you want to kind of level up and you start thinking you can't ask any questions, right? And then you get to this point where you're a senior developer and you're asking a ton of questions again. And people really appreciate that. And I think when you are, it's the same thing within the bounds of working with a client and trying to understand their industry. You need to ask a lot of questions. If you don't understand something, you need to be upfront about it and ask the question about the business so that you understand it and you can move forward. That's also means the rest of the team should be listening, right? So oftentimes we're having these kind of conversations early on in a project. We're having, we're talking to the client, trying to understand what we're building for them. We're trying to understand their industry because we have to do that in order to build for them. And if you're sitting in those conversations as an individual contributor, you should be paying attention to every part of that conversation, right? Because everything the client says at that moment is like a pearl of wisdom. And you will pick up on that stuff listening in. It might trigger questions in your own mind, and you should ask those. And I encourage every person on my team, from the most senior person to the most junior person, to ask questions in those conversations. And then as we're kind of going through the experience, as we're building out the application, we're going to keep running into things. We're going to run into jargon or into systems we never encountered before. And again, ask the questions. That's kind of my core thing. That's how you learn the industry that you're building for. And over time, you'll you'll understand enough. Like, if it's a 3-week engagement, it is what it is. But if you're doing a 1 to 2 year engagement with a client, you're going to learn a lot, right? And so I think that curiosity is necessary. As far as building actual empathy with your client, it starts inside of you, right? So you have to be curious about who you are. You have to be comfortable in your own skin. You have to be willing to acknowledge you don't know everything. You have to be willing to, be happy, to be sad, like, not to get overly psychological, but I think that's important, right? And when you have that empathy with yourself, the kindness, the ability to reflect on, your good work and the areas where you need to grow, having that kindness to yourself then goes to the kindness to other people. And you want that kindness when you're talking to clients. Particularly if you are working for an agency or consultancy. A lot of folks, very bluntly, they initially feel like, hey, why are the consultants being brought in, right? We can do this for folks. We don't need these folks. And so coming in initially with like this kindness and a generosity of spirit and assuming, hey, at the end of the day, everyone wants to do the right thing. And it gives you patience, it gives you grace, it gives you space to listen, and your clients pick up on that, and they go from being clients to partners, right? You get it from this mindset of like, well, I'm paid here to do a job, to like, I'm learning their industry. I want them to be successful. That makes me successful. I want to understand their problem so I can solve their problem. All of that, I think, is really important in building out that empathy with a client.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. Okay, it's also kind of similar to what I've been doing and my colleagues at PM Power, where we have this metaphor of an iceberg, where all the things that you do are more of your IQ based. But since it's all happening through teams, there's a lot more of EQ that you want. But
Yep.
even more intrinsic is about the self. And how are you able to manage yourself so that it can help others? Yeah, that's wonderful. So I would like to go a little deeper into both these aspects. You're talking about team, and everybody wants high performing teams. Okay. What has been your success mantra that has helped you build these high performing teams?
So I think, and this is always hard, but I think one of the most important things is to, you know, uh, a colleague of mine once said that he has 2 ears and one mouth and he uses them in that proportion, right? And so I admit it can be hard for me at times to just sit there and listen. I think everyone has that problem. We all want to kind of jump in and solve a problem and really kind of talk through everything. But I think it's really, really important to be willing to just sit quietly, listen to your team. Sometimes they're approaching you with a technology problem, and I've found 9 times out of 10, I might have absolutely nothing to contribute to the conversation, but I sit there quietly and them talking through the problem with me, they find the solution. They just needed an opportunity to talk through the problem. So I think it's really, really important to enable your team by not trying to solve the problem for them. Let them help them solve it, or even more importantly, they solve it all on their own. You're just there to listen, maybe guide a little bit, and that helps build their confidence and in their experience, right? So that's one. The second thing is making sure you have a team, right? And I think that's really hard to do in a remote world, but it's very possible. But difficult, right? It's not like everyone's getting together in a room and everyone's cubicles are across from each other, so they're constantly talking. So I think things like daily stand-ups are absolutely important for a remote team to build up that teamwork, to build up a sense of camaraderie. Um, and the reason I say that is, you have these moments, where people can see each other, they can hear each other's voices, they can hear the problems that they're maybe experiencing, and that might prompt someone on the team to go, hey, after stand up, why don't we pair up? I'll help you solve the problem, right? And then you make sure you have a space like Slack that everyone is using, right? So you have that constant day-to-day interaction throughout, kind of basically going on all the time. I encourage if people are using Slack to turn off all those stupid notifications. I hate that knock knock sound. I don't like the little red circle. There's psychology behind that where it makes you anxious, so you need to solve it. So I turn off all notifications except for direct mentions of me, right? I encourage everyone to do that. But have Slack there so that you have that virtual water cooler. And then I really encourage folks when they're talking about the project to not have DMs, right? So if you've turned off notifications and you've turned off that stupid knock knock sound, you can have a conversation in a team channel and not worry about disturbing anyone else, right? Do it in a thread, but you're still having the conversation there. And now, if someone is, they've finished a PR and they're jumping in the channel to see what's going on, and they're like, oh, I can help I can help these folks out. I know this problem. They'll jump into the thread. Or maybe you've gone through the thread, you and your partner, and you realize, hey, we need a third person to come in. You can't do that in a DM, right? You've had an hour-long conversation. You can't bring them in. But if it's in a thread in a shared channel, they can jump in. They can scan the thread really quickly. They've gotten up to speed, and now you're solving problems. All that I think is really important. And then I think you have to give the team the tools they need to do the job. They absolutely have to have the tools. If there's, I don't like saying that there is a mandated single IDE. Give the team, if people want different IDEs, obviously there's always going to be exceptions, but give them the tool that makes them best able to do their jobs. Give them the training they need to do their jobs. If they need a certification, give them that certification. You're going to get a much stronger team. Your folks are going to want to stay with you. They're going to grow. You'll have senior folks. And then you have to protect your team, right? So I believe that after you've worked about 40 hours a week, every hour after that, you're writing bugs. Right. So if your team, it's Friday afternoon and people are cranking and they work into the evening and they work on Saturday. Well, guess what? On Monday and Tuesday, your team's basically correcting all the problems that they created on Friday evening and Saturday. So you have to hold the line. You have to protect your team, hold the line, make sure they're working a solid 40-hour week, right? Now, there's going to be occasional crunch time. I get that. You have to get something out the door. But if crunch time is more than a couple times a year, if crunch time is like every 2 weeks, you have a problem. And so you as the leader, to make sure you have a high-powered team, you have to protect them. You have to go and talk to the product team and, have the hard conversation again and make sure that you are building to your team. And if they want more work than your team can do, go get more people or have the team, lower their sights. Let's be realistic here.
Yeah. So while all these things will help the teams, how do you enable the teams, probably the individual preferences, or everybody goes through high days and low days, or there could be other things that are bothering them.
Right.
So as a leader, what has worked for you to, let's say, be more sensitive to these kind of situations?
Well, I mean, right away, I think again, it starts with the idea that I trust everyone and that, that's important, right? So if I've gone through a really rigorous hiring process, I should have probably interviewed people. I should understand their strengths and weaknesses. I should understand that they know how to do their jobs. And I want to bring those folks on and assume that they're smart, assume they know what they're doing, and I trust them, right? So I'm obviously, assigning people work and making sure they're doing it, but I start with a level of trust, right? The second thing is, people will often have personal issues, not just work-related issues. And so again, I'm there to listen. I'm definitely not there to solve a problem, right? So if someone has something going on outside of work, they need some time off, I'm going to get them that space, right? So, if that means we might have a slightly slower sprint. That's fine. I have a policy of, if someone comes to me with at least a month's notice saying they need time off, I blanket approve it, right? Because I know people need time to get away to recharge their batteries. And then, I do, this is always controversial because I know using things like story points can be wielded as a hammer, right? It's like your team, why aren't they delivering all the story points? But I like to use story points as a way to kind of look at the team to see how they're doing, right? So it's like if I find the team is consistently delivering, say, I don't know, like 30 story points a sprint, and then suddenly we have a sprint where it's going down, I don't look at it as like, well, the team's failing and I need to go and figure it out. It's more a situation where, maybe folks are struggling with something. I should have a conversation with them. Hey, I noticed something's going on. Is there anything you want to talk about? And I make the assumption it's work related, but if there's something else and they want to talk about it, so be it. The other thing is, and this is really, really important, is I don't force non-work related conversations, right?
Okay.
So a lot of folks, and I think this is a mistake, is to try to get everyone to talk about their personal life, right?
Mm.
What's going on? Tell me about your weekend. I had this problem. Tell me about your problems. That's not our job, right? Our job as leaders is we want folks to show up and to do really good work, to be empathetic listeners, to be there to support them. And there are a lot of really good folks who do not want to share their personal life with you. And that has nothing to do with you. It's not a reflection of who that person is either. It is for some people, they like to keep their personal and work life separate. And we absolutely need to respect that. And if you as a leader are like, oh, I bet they're having a problem in their personal life, and I'm this leader who can solve it for them, you're going to ruin the dynamic in your team. You're trying to force an interaction that a person doesn't want to have with you. Is not empathetic. It's poisoning, and it'll absolutely destroy your team.
Yeah. Talking of this team dynamics or the interpersonal dynamics in a team, and you also talked about using Slack or having stand-ups and the need for interactions.
Mhm.
What is your take on now everybody wants to do vibe coding, where the conversations are happening more with the tool than with the person next to you?
I hate the term vibe coding. I absolutely hate that term. I think I uh I hate that term. I hate prompt engineering. I hate all these cutesy little terms that at the end of the day are about how we're using a tool to get a job done. So I think AI tools are very powerful tools when they're used properly. And they are incredibly dangerous tools when used wrong. So I think that you I think using an AI tool to help you, to basically generate your source code can be very powerful. It can help you deliver a lot of work in a very short amount of time. But it's like working with a really hyper enthusiastic junior developer who is way too trusting of its sources, right? It's like, we all remember we have that junior developer who went to Stack Overflow and found the top ranked solution and was absolutely the wrong solution to what we're building, right? Um, and I think vibe coding is the same thing, right? So you have this incredibly powerful tool that, like a junior developer, is going to be very enthusiastic and crank out a ton of code. And you, as the human in the mix, need to get in there and review that code,
Hmm.
right? And you also want another human to review that code,
Mhm.
right? So right away now we're reintroducing, we're going away from this idea of it's you and the Gen AI system, and now it's the Gen AI system has assisted you in the solution, and you now have you are validating the solution, and you have another human validating the solution, and now you can talk about it again. You're having that experience go on, and this is all important because one, uh, these systems they're not humans.
Mm.
They are autocomplete. They're very fancy autocomplete, but they're autocomplete. And so you need to make sure that auto-completed solution is right. We're still seeing security problems, right? So you can't prompt engineer, make this more secure.
Yeah.
Right? You can't prompt engineer that, right? Think of like all the source code that we've seen in Stack Overflow, right? Or that we've seen in open source solutions, that, all the stuff that's feeding the Gen AI solutions, they all have security problems, right? You need to be aware enough of that you are looking for those security problems, right? They also, because they hallucinate, and remember, hallucination is core to how Gen AI works, right? It's just, we're never going to get rid of that because we need hallucinations to get multiple solutions to one problem, right? They may hallucinate a package that does not exist in the real world, right? And there are, hostile actors that will see these packages that don't exist. They'll go create those packages. Now they exist. And you, trusting the Gen AI solution, are now downloading a package that has a payload that you wish wasn't on your computer, right? So we have to be skeptical. We have to have a human in the mix. We have to have someone senior enough to understand what we're doing. I think vibe coding has this incredible, again, I hate the term, but I'll use it, is incredibly powerful for prototypes. I think it is incredibly powerful for boilerplate code. I think it can be powerful to get you going in a path. But when you're solving a real problem, you're solving a problem that no one else has solved before, you need a human in there to make sure you're solving that properly. And in fact, I wish I could remember it, but the exact URL, but ThoughtWorks had a blog post about 2 weeks ago where the engineer was talking about this. And what they said is they used all these Gen AI tools to help solve the problem. And when we got to the final code, they threw everything away. But because they now understood the problem working with the Gen AI tools, they're able to craft the absolute perfect solution. And they were still able to do it in more, faster than they would have done it just on their own. That, to me, that's how you use those tools.
Yeah, I remember my experiments. When you look at the code, generated code, you see so much of tech debt that's already built in there.
Yeah,
it's good for a prototype or a demo or for a quick validation of your understanding.
yeah. It's interesting to me because it reminds me a little bit of when years ago, one of my first programming languages was PHP. And I remember at the time PHP, I think it's a fun programming language. I absolutely do. But at the time, everyone said PHP is absolutely horrible. It's just, the worst language in the world. And, the thing about it was that it was because of all the Stack Overflow stuff. Right? Everyone was trying to figure it out, and there's all these Stack Overflow solutions, and the ones that were most popular were not necessarily the best solutions. They were just the most popular solutions, and because of that, the whole community got a bad vibe around it, right? Perl's another one, right? Where it's like, that was my first programming language, and contrary to popular belief, you can write clear Perl code, readable code, but everyone got into the thing of like, how can I obfuscate my code? How can I write this complex solution in the fewest characters possible? And so it got a bad reputation, right? And I think vibe coding is sort of the same way, right? Like the Gen AI tools are going out and they're reading in Stack Overflow, and they're reading from open source libraries, and they're reading from your internal code base, and it's code from a year ago. When was the model last trained? And you need to just accept that, right? It may not have the best solution. It's just going to have a solution that you can use as a foundation.
So we covered a lot of ground, but then we didn't touch upon one aspect. You did mention that about the self. What are some practices that have helped you stay grounded? Because when you're interacting with so many different teams, so many challenges, so much of technology changes, client requirements, and so on?
Oh gosh. I mean, none of them are work related.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, there are a couple things I obviously, I'm constantly, I shouldn't say constantly. So one work-related thing that I do is I think it's really important that I connect with everyone on my team. So the folks who report to me, and my manager, I report to him. I basically I talk to him every 2 weeks. I talk to my folks every, 1 week or every 2 weeks. I think that's really important to kind of stay grounded, that you're constantly checking with your team,
Mhm.
just to make sure that you're understanding first what's going on with your team, and then checking in with your manager to help them, or to help them understand what you're doing and for you to understand what their expectations are. You should constantly be having those conversations. So one, that helps me stay grounded at work. The second thing is, I'm not constantly reading stuff, but I am reading, I read things like Hacker News. I subscribe to a couple of newsletters. I listen to a couple podcasts, on double speed. I'm not, I listen to so many podcasts. It's not like I'm absorbing everything, but it's nice to kind of, something will kind of pop in when I'm listening, and it captures my attention. I listen a little deeper. So it's really nice to kind of have those things going on. I don't really code anymore, but every once in a while I do like to get my hands dirty, so that helps. My love is really around system administration, DevOps. So when I can, I like to get in there and, maybe, spin up a system, take a look at security logs, stuff like that, just to make sure that I'm still close to the technology. And then personally, I like to have, and I think it's up to everyone what they want to do, but I have a hobby outside of work, and I really believe that, if you have a hobby and it becomes your work, it's no longer a hobby, right? Because you need it to make money. And so it changes your relationship with it. So my hobby is photography. I love to photograph. I love to cook. Background. So I do all the cooking for my wife. She does all the cleaning. We have a great deal here. She cleans, I cook. Um, and that helps me stay grounded, right? So there's this moment, the workday is done. I'll take that half hour and cook. As I'm talking about, I realize like both photography and cooking have a technology kind of component to them. Where it's, with photography, it's thinking about how light is playing with the subject. And with cooking, it's like that recipe, how I'm bringing it together and then I tweak it, right? So I don't follow the recipe exactly, but I have a foundation. Those things I think kind of keep me grounded.
Mhm.
And then the last thing is, I exercise, I walk every day, I work out a couple times a week, and I find the walking to be very meditative. So I do a little bit of meditation. So I think all that, it's very long-winded, but I think starting with the connection with my team, but more importantly, the connection with myself outside of work, away from work and things that are not work related, I think recharges my batteries so that when Monday morning rolls around, I'm ready to hit the ground.
Wonderful. It's a really well-rounded and balanced way of staying grounded at work and outside, and also the ability to shift between these two environments. Yeah, really nice.
Yeah. And I think everyone has to find their own path, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, I think the important thing is having something where you recharge your batteries. And
Mhm.
I think it's a tragedy. I really honestly do. I think our generation, Shiv, I think we did a real disservice to a whole generation of developers where we told them, if you love developing so much, you should be willing to do it all the time. And if you're willing to do it all the time, I'll pay you for doing that 60 hours a week.
Mhm.
I think we've done a disservice to folks because we've taken something that they really love to do and we burn them out.
Mhm.
And I think that we really need to encourage people to come in, do your job. If you still want to code on the weekend, I love it. More power to you. But that's your time. That's your personal project. I'm not going to tell you what to do. And if you don't want to code on the weekend, that's great. That means you're recharging your batteries when you come in. I know you have passion for your job. I want you to keep that passion and I want you to recover it on your time away.
Wonderful. I think we are almost about time. Is there anything that we missed covering that you would like to share with our listeners?
I don't know. I mean, I guess the one thing I keep coming back to, and it's not just around tech, as a programmer or technology, I think it's really important that we listen to ourselves, that we respect ourselves, that we are kind to ourselves, and everything flows from that, right? And, I think respecting, being kind to ourselves gives us space to learn more, to listen to our colleagues, to, if we're in consulting, to listen to our clients, to listen to our friends, to our partners. And that's going to help us grow as an individual, which is going to help us grow at work. And, we're in a time, because of genetic AI, the way the economy is that, things are constantly changing, but that's always been the case, right? And so if you are protecting yourself, being kind to yourself, you will continue to flourish, you'll continue to grow. I think it's important to do that.
Wonderful. On that note, thanks a lot, Eric, for coming and sharing not only your story, but also your experience and perspectives. And I particularly could relate to a lot of things that you said.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I appreciated, having the time to tell you who I am. Thank you.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People Stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.